Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you'll see a little link down below, and you can click on that, and you'll end up in Zoom. You click on the link that's there, and you'll end up in Mukana, and that's where you become a producer for the show. You actually drive the show with your comments and questions and your votes. So make sure to join us in Mukana, just following that little trail through, and ask your questions. Any question is fair game around media and virtual production from 7 to 8. From 8 to 9, we spend a little bit more time on something specific. Today, we're going to talk about USDZ, which is a 3D file format that's finding its way into video, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then tomorrow we talk about education. As a note, I don't think that education will stream, or that all of Saturday will stream, mostly because of some issues that I will be in a plane. And so it'll be hard for us to set some of those things up. So we're going to get Guy to host at least the first half of that. And then we're working on the second half of it, but nothing's going to get to YouTube on Saturday and Sunday. We should be back our regularly scheduled program on Monday as we figure that stuff out, depending on the bandwidth that I have in North Carolina. So anyway, so that's what's coming up on the second hours. If you think you can be part of the show, then just come at 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for the mic checks. You can come as early as 6 if you want to try to figure it out. Make sure that you're actually ready. And that's about it. Bill, do you want to take over with the questions?
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. And good morning, everybody. We're going to move on to the first question today, and it comes from Rupert McCrae of Dallas, Texas. And Rupert says there was a great Q&A session yesterday with Jonathan Cotalgo. I'm sorry, I'm pronouncing that horribly, from Liminal in the Zoom OSC test kitchen, mainly discussing Zoom ISO. Does anyone know where this can be watched again online?
Yeah, go ahead, Leland.
Best thing to do is to head over to Facebook and look for Zoom Test Kitchen, where Jeff Whitgren follows up on that group for most purposes, and that's where you're going to find the best place to get your info.
Yeah. Next question.
Next question comes from Joshua Feingold in New York, New York. Microsoft's event yesterday was a technical disaster. The stream was down for the first 20 minutes. Any ideas about what went wrong? Also, what are your opinions about the production decision relative to Apple and Google's event?
Input, Jeffrey?
So yeah, I ended up watching it on somebody else's stream because it worked Engadget podcast or something like that. It was just horrible trying to watch it.
What were the technical? Tell us a little bit about what was the technical issues, and then also the production. Was it a live stage event?
It was, I believe it was a live stage event pre-recorded. What happened was if you went to the actual stream page, you only saw the countdown and like the first 5 minutes, and every time you refreshed, it would take you right back to the beginning, and then wouldn't go from there. So I don't know how these other guys got the stream out there, but like I said, I used a third-party site to actually watch it. But yeah, everybody was on a stage, a lot of screens in the background. I don't know how they did it, if it was a big screen in the background or if they decided to use something like Unreal Engine to do that. Mm-hmm. But it was a pretty decent presentation. We learned a little bit about Windows and where it's going. So I can't wait to see what happens when they finally release it.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I think it was all pre-recorded. I think the problem they had was provisioning on the stream, and because it would just go into buffering mode and just freeze several times if you're watching from the Microsoft site, if you got into it from there. I guess other people had other pathways in, maybe they were on a different backbone, but something was getting overloaded in their provisioning, and it didn't scale to cover themselves somehow.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of things that can go wrong. I believe that their YouTube and Twitter were fine. So I think that was those have a lower load as well. So to be fair to Microsoft, probably the vast majority of people who went to the Microsoft webpage to do it until they started telling people to go to YouTube and Twitter. Twitter those two probably had much lower loads. And to be honest, they do it every day. The hardest part with all of this when it comes to streaming is doing it every once in a while. That is just it's a brutal way to run events, is to say, I'm going to have 10 million people watch something and I'm only going to do it once a year or twice a year. Wow. It's so stressful. And I've been definitely in those situations, and where a company might be doing something 3 to 5 times a year, there's going to be over 10 million people watching, and you have to get everything right and there's no mistake. So that's what comes up this is what you see when you don't get to do it over and over again. If Microsoft did something every day or every week or every month, this would be nothing. And they have a couple little ones, but you want to fail small, but often. Fail small but often is a really, really good way to work this up so that you can scale it up. Yeah, go ahead, Rupert.
So I didn't see the event, but I do know that Microsoft are trying to come up with this sort of triangular arrangement between Teams, Microsoft Stream, and then Yammer. And they're really trying to put, if you drill in through like the Office 365 corporate side of things, they're really trying to leverage that relationship between those platforms and all the streaming capabilities. So maybe they were trying to cook something up with that. I don't know.
Yeah, on a big release is the last place you want to try to cook something up new. You want to keep it as stationary as possible. Go ahead, Leland.
Yeah, May was a month that MS just announced a recovery feature within Teams that allows it to restart the event in case things have a major failover like that. And like Alex said, it could be a lot of different things, but I think in the end, what we learn from these is obviously what not to do, but not necessarily is that always disclosed. So we kind of have to just take it with what it is and expect that if an error happens, it's probably a technical issue more so than a user error. But like Alex says, people are learning and trying new things all the time. And you try something new on a production for the first time, you're expecting a fail. Yeah,
and technical issues are generally still user issues. It's how you treated the equipment or how you set up the infrastructure or how you did, it's still a someone's error, in how that was provisioned out. What do people think of the stage, the kind of the pseudo stage experience? Did that work for people as far as those of you that watched it? I have to admit that I'm kind of over that experience, of someone standing on stage, but I think I'm just curious at whether people like the look. I think that a lot of event companies and event groups want to go back to that look. I'm just not certain that when we look at where Apple's kind of taken it, where you have they're just all over Apple campus. I felt like there were a handful of places where Apple went back to, we're going to be in Steve Jobs Theater for a second. And I was like, really? Are we still doing that? when I watched it, I think this is all green screen here. And so I think that I can tell because it's got too much light wrap. Anyway, so go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, it is. It's mostly virtual stage, but they kept it unlike real stages, which are really huge, and they got away from, it's more intimate than a typical real stage setup is,
Yeah, I have to admit that I definitely lean towards what Apple's been doing, which is really just taking you all over the campus and moving things around and building those out. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, in a lot of these shots that I've been looking at, because I didn't watch it, it looks to me like the set of America's Got Talent or something like that. Like they're taking that entertainment stage with dramatic lighting look and trying to make that these are our presenters. And it's an odd sort of thing. I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, and I don't feel like anybody has been doing it very well. I mean, I think Apple has taken it as far as it can go so far. Frame.io being probably still one of the top ones. The last Apple one and the Frame.io, I would say, are probably the two best that I've seen because they were just movies. Like we stopped trying to make them a stage thing. We're not, why are we continuing to do something in a stage environment when we no longer have the stage? So, I think that the previous ones, the previous Microsoft one and the Google one especially was super weird. So I think that those are, I think we'll see. I think we're going to move more and more towards just a video production. Next question.
Moving on, Nick Pavlinek of Southeast Michigan says, watching the NASA spacewalk to install new solar panels right now, what cameras do they use on the suits? They seem low res. Why not 4K? Is it a bandwidth issue?
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So I looked into this about 2 years ago. So what it is, it's actually two cameras. So on the suits that you would have seen, they would have an SD camera, as you can see here, and a HD camera. The HD camera has only been in use for 2 years on the space station. This photo is of Chris Cassidy, so he was only recently up on the space station. This is when he was on Earth training for that particular mission. So the HD camera actually uses Wi-Fi. There are 8 Wi-Fi access points outside the space station that these cameras can talk to. The SD camera, which was developed in the year 2000, uses NASCAR car to pits video technology, so from the 1990s. So the in-car, so the camera from the inside of NASCAR, NASA uses that technology. That's an older technology, but the HD camera does work. The only reason why they'll switch from HD to SD is if they lose a Wi-Fi signal, because the SD signal will be much stronger, low latency. And if you're in Russia, in Russia, we just use a GoPro on the wrist.
It's like Russia just uses a pencil.
And a
Go
pencil.
ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, we had somebody, Alex got somebody to come on from the Red Bull Near Space team, and it was fascinating. And one of the things that I learned from that was that it takes so much time to vet a piece of equipment going on the launch and into space that you're 2 or 3 years behind on camera technology at the minimum. So you're not going to get the latest and greatest. It's just not going to happen.
Anyway, it's pretty slick though. What they're coming from space. Next question.
Link Pavlinek's back from Southeast Michigan with another one. What's everyone's browser of choice and why? Do you use multiple different browsers?
Go ahead, Leland.
One in particular we've gone to is Firefox. Due to the fact that using vMix Call, we've been unable to adequately maintain more than 720p in video calls, but Firefox seems to alleviate that issue in the coding, so we're able to pull in a full 1080p signal in vMix Call. And it's usually a little more stable and less intrusive than Google is.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, mainly use Safari, but when I'm doing any web coding, it's Firefox, because they have a way of displaying the grid lines if you're doing any grid setup.
Yeah, good, Carl.
So yeah, mainly use Safari unless I'm on Google sites. Then I'll use Chrome, or if I'm needing to use MIDI, which only works in Chrome.
Good, Rupert.
So I just sometimes use multiple browsers because I may have to be logged into 2 instances of the same environment and just want to keep them separated.
Yeah, Jeffrey.
Yeah, same here. I'll use Chrome and Firefox, and then sometimes Edge if I want to open up different types of social networks and stuff like that. And of course, if I'm doing any web stuff, there are a couple different websites out there that you put in the web page, and it'll check across multiple browsers, which is really, really great to see the load time and how they look from there.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, I bounce back and forth between Chrome and Safari all day. I spend most of my personal time in Safari, but whenever we do office hours, I'm in Chrome because some of the plugins here work better.
Yeah, I think that I use Chrome probably most, just because, and I think that I had Safari most, and then I started doing a lot of work for Google, so then it became this thing that I did for a long time. We were freelancing for them for 5 years, and so you just got used to being in Chrome all the time. And then all my setups and everything else are there. I think Firefox, I went back to Firefox a fair bit for a while, but they changed something with the way LastPass worked years ago, and it literally just made it a little harder. And then I just I don't want to play anymore. So I just almost never open. It's amazing how you can do one little thing, and then people just make an entire behavior change. Because Firefox was equal to Chrome until that happened, and then I stopped. I just almost never use it anymore. And then I use Safari. Definitely. Interesting enough, I use it when I shop on the Apple Store. The online Apple Store. It runs a little bit smoother. And then also, if I want to look at HDR, of course, I'm going to watch, on a computer that can handle it. I'm going to use Safari because it can handle it. And then finally, you can drag images straight from Google Image Search straight into Keynote from Safari, but not from Chrome. So if I'm doing a fast build of just for placement only, and I'm just throwing things into Keynote, I'll always use Safari because you can drag the images straight in, even pings with transparency straight from the web to Keynote, which is important to me. Go ahead, Grant.
You just reminded me of something in Safari. I use Chrome all the time, but Safari, I jump over there when I'm doing YouTube and want to do the picture-in-picture. So in Safari, you can right-click and then right-click again, and then you get the picture-in-picture, and it sits over your whole system. You can keep going and have a little YouTube clip. That's handy.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Comes from Sam Greenwood in Toronto, Canada. And Sam says, what's the best mic for a beginner that requires the least post-processing?
Good, Carl.
So I've chosen 2, and these are 2 that come up quite a lot for panelists. So Jeffrey's using the one on the left here, which is the SM58. He's got the super cardioid version of it. And then the MV7. The MV7 is a little bit more expensive, but it has a USB built in. So this is the least fuss. And a lot of the palettes we actually have here also use the MV7, which has a USB. So that way you can just go directly into your computer and have your webcam. So you can just have this and a webcam and you're off and running with the races. So these are the 2 I would suggest. There are others, but as a beginner, these 2 are pretty solid.
Go ahead, Jesse.
If you want a mic that plugs into the USB without needing something going XLR, like a dongle for that, then this Yeti Nano, $99, sounds pretty good. I enjoyed it for a year.
Go ahead, Ken.
Being very much a beginner to audio and having a whole ton of mics, because you didn't mention budget, then the Power PR40 into the mix pre. And if you have any issues, you come to office hours and Mickey will sort you out.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
2 microphones. One, and least post-processing, you want to get a dynamic microphone over anything. IK Multimedia has the iRig Mic HD2, which can plug into a phone and into the computer. And then, of course, there's these hybrid microphones, like Audio-Technica has the ATR2100, which is an XLR and a USB microphone, which you can plug into the computer, but not the iPhone or iPad.
Go ahead, Bill.
I've always said that a microphone is like a camera for your ears. Basically, it's going to record whatever you put into it. So I think actually, if you want a better sound, practice. Your voice is created by muscles and things like that. Just like if you take a picture of yourself without doing anything in the morning when you look funny, it's going to be a picture of a funny person.
Still, good cameras makes a difference. Like a good SLR is better than other things. You know, the main thing is that you have to update. The question is, how often do you want to update your mic? Eventually, what you're going to end up with is, if you're doing something for this kind of work, you're going to end up spending between $200 and $300, you know, on a mic, and between, you know, $100 and $1,000 on an interface. And you know, when you're beginning, there's always a temptation to get the beginner thing. Now, if you don't know if you're going to do it, if you're not sure you're going to keep doing this, then don't spend very much money on it. You know, a Yeti is pretty good at 150. The MV7 is great. The MV7 is a great overall, all-around mic that can do that. As soon as you think, well, I'm beginning, but I'm going to keep going, I think this is something that I think I'm going to do over the next couple of years, then I would save up a little longer and just buy the right thing first. Because then you just don't have, you know, the things like, buy one, cry one, as Chris Fenwick would say, buy once, cry once. And so a lot of times I wait on things a long time so that I can stack up the money that I need to just get the right thing first. Now, if I'm not sure if I'm going to do it, you don't want to spend a lot of money on something that's a dead end. But if you think you're going to, there's, you know, I think that a lot of us use the Heil because it's very forgiving for your environment. You know, so it's got a high, what we call off-axis rejection, which means that you can have a room that isn't very good, and you'll still sound good if you're within 3 inches of the mic. And so, so having that in an interface makes a difference. Now, there are ones that I would, when we say beginner, that I wouldn't get, like a Neumann. I have a 102. Bill has a 103. Chris has a 102. The problem with those is now you have to be really serious from day one. And Jeffrey touched on this a little bit, of getting dynamic mics. To have a high off-axis rejection means you don't have to treat your whole room just for the mic. So those are the things that you want to kind of think about when you think about the mic. A dynamic mic, something that's got a lot of high off-axis rejection. And the two most popular, or the three most popular, are the SV or SB or SMV7 and B7. The Heil PR40, PR30, but PR40 is most of us use, or the SM58. And I think those are a pretty good group of mics that are not going to require you to rebuild your room just to use them, and you're going to sound great. Next question.
Rupert McCrae is up next from Dallas, Texas again, and he says, if I have a 1080p Zoom and account with Zoom rooms attached to the account, will joining someone else's meeting with one of my Zoom rooms bump their meeting to 1080 or still only 720?
Go ahead, Grant.
No, it's all about the host. You know, so the host of that meeting may be at 360. The 720 comes when the Zoom room joins it, and it just bumps it. But it won't. It's not doing that because your account is set to HD. It's all just because of the Zoom room. So no, it won't go to 1080. It'll just go to 720.
Next question.
Moving on to JHB, and JHB in New York says, what are the major differences, advantages, and disadvantages between Zoom and Microsoft Teams? Thanks.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Well, just an example of maybe one of the differences. If you are in a corporate environment and you're baked into the Office 365 ecosystem, then Teams does a pretty good job of integrating your scheduling and making everything kind of easy to pop up for your recipient, for your attendees and stuff like that. That's just one example.
Yeah, go ahead, Grant.
Zoom doesn't make me want to gouge my eyes out every time I use it. So Teams is
Tell us how you really feel, Grant. Don't hold back.
No. So Teams, thankfully, I don't have to use it very often, which is really good. But when Teams is just, it's like what happened to Skype. You know, when Skype was great, and then Microsoft took it over and slowly made it worse and worse and worse with all this extra stuff and all the account stuff, and it just makes it so difficult. They've got a nice thing with the NDI. I have to give them that the NDI out of Teams is really good. But ultimately, I think Zoom wins. Zoom isn't perfect, but it's the best. And when you go feature for feature, I think Zoom just wins out on stability.
Good, Mark.
A lot of the corporations that we work with require Teams because of security. I'm not sure much about why the security is better with Teams, but we find
it's not better. It's just that their IT already has done it. It's not that Teams security is better. It's that they already have 365 built into the system, and the IT has blessed it. And blessing something at a large corporation takes months. So I think that's more of the issue there. Yeah, Sky.
I really want to say that it's a suite of tools that Teams is collaborative with, like you say, the whole enterprise, and it's got multiple things where Zoom is more focused on just the video conferencing concept. And so that's the confusion that early days was people were trying to make it an apple and an apple, or an orange and an orange, and they're two different concepts.
Yeah, and I think that I even bristle a little bit as Zoom expands out. Like oh no, this is going to ruin everything. When I see the chat function and everything else and the other things, I'm like, I don't want them to worry about that. I just want my video back. Go ahead, Bill.
I just find, because I do a Teams thing, I did it Wednesday. It's a little grabby. Once you're there and you come back to another thing, for me, kind of getting the hooks from Teams out so that I can move back to Zoom for my daily stuff is a little bit difficult. It's not impossible and it's not horrible, but it's been working much better for us. I've been getting good quality screen scrape recordings off of it, but it seems a little grabby that way.
I think that one of the things is if you're doing events for the public and you're not doing them in Teams, for companies that have Teams, because of the login issues I've had with Microsoft, if I see someone else invite me to a Teams, I'll do a team event. Hey, we're going to do this thing and it's all going to be in Teams. I won't go because I'm just I don't even know what's going to happen there. Like how I'm going to log in and how it's going to manage my logins. And now I'm going to have to reset my password. And then there's a whole bunch of I just see this huge mess of how am I going to get into that and how am I going to deal with my Microsoft account after I do that. And so, because it tends to be very, as Bill said, very clingy, and suddenly you're tied into things that you didn't know you were going to be tied into, especially if you already have an account. Like 090 is in the Exchange server, and I have my own login, and then I have my own personal login, and there's a whole bunch of things there, and it'll start reordering a whole bunch of things for me, trying to get that all to fit together. And I know that there's a half a day of me unwrapping my system again every time I touch an external team server. And so as a result, I won't touch it. Like literally, I think CES did something or whatever, and I was like, I'm not going to any of that stuff. There's nothing that's worth watching for me. Like literally nothing that's worth watching for me to join a Teams event because it means that I'll have to unwrap all of that. Go ahead, Rupert.
So just in relation to that, I do know that a little while back they did introduce a way of inviting participants through some kind of anonymous method that didn't require a login, but I'm sure you have to kind of configure that. But also out of the box, the difference between Zoom and Teams can sometimes be seen immediately in terms of video quality, because unless you have the time to, or unless you've gone through the steps to set up a professional account and configure the HD, out of the box, Teams will look better. You can make Zoom look better, but out of the box, side by side, a lot of people go towards Teams because it looks better.
I do think that one of the big problems that Zoom has is that the out of the box experience is actually, we have it everyone should just use Zoom, but we've been living in 1080p for a long time, and then I realized that everybody else's experience, 90%, 95% of the world's experience is in 360p, and I think that Zoom really has to figure that out soon, because you open up almost everything else and it's higher resolution out of the box than what Zoom does. Go ahead, Grant.
And just quickly, I was at an event recently where the production team had to install Office 365 quickly on one of the machines. So they just typical install of 365, and they load up PowerPoint, they get going, they're live on the screen, the projectors, and suddenly Teams messages are popping up over the screen.
It's
they're
very
like
intrusive.
freaking out, right? Because
Yeah, we
because
had
it
that
just-
problem.
It auto logged in Teams, and they're doing it on their phone, and it was their account, and 365 just kind of logged them in. So it was just all of that stuff. That grabby is the term.
Yeah, and so anyway, so that's the. I mean, I think that's really the challenge for Microsoft is getting that user experience working. You know, is a big problem with it. I do think that the NDI output. There's a lot of. They're obviously paying a lot of attention to broadcast solutions. I think a lot of people have been burned so badly by TX. Also, that I think that a lot of us paid a heavy price for using Skype and TX, and so now that as soon as you have 1080p Zoom, the experience with Skype was so bad at the end that a lot of us don't want to go back. Like the scars are too deep, and every time you pull at them, it goes all the way back down to the muscle. Go ahead, Rupert.
Sorry, just one final point. Microsoft are also in the process of retiring Skype for Business, which was, of course, a separate product, but they're trying to roadmap all of those people into Teams, basically. So that's why you're seeing some other features kind of rolled up into Teams.
Yeah, and so it's a it's going to be a hard one for everybody else. The big advantage that WebEx and GoToMeeting and FaceTime and Teams and all those have is that they have a large installed base that's very hard to change. So they have time. Like it's not like they're going away anytime soon. They have time to figure this out. But Zoom is, I think, still head and shoulders above everybody else. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, could you see the office hours concept applied to other disciplines, the sciences, literature, and so forth?
I see it applicable to all of them. Go ahead, Rupert.
So I know that Tony Mobley has done a kind of spin-off in his own area of interest using a very similar model. So I think it's already happening.
And by the way, Tony is very kind. I watched Tony's and it was great. He's very kind with giving us a lot of props. You don't need to do that. Like if you're spinning this off, just make a show. Like you don't need to talk about office hours. You don't need to give me any props, and you don't need to do anything else. The goal is to spawn it out. Like it's not there as people don't need to just do a great show. It can come up later in the press releases when you're hugely rich and popular. You can say, well, I learned everything in office hours or whatever. That's fine, but you don't need to make it anything past that. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that. And I highly encourage everyone to take what we've learned here and apply it in your own way. So if your own way is Xerox copying this, that's totally fine with me. I just want to make sure everyone knows that. You don't have to ask me for permission or ask for anything else. I want you to do that. And then the second thing is that you shouldn't also feel bad about taking it and making it your own. Like I think that Alex is crazy over here. I like this part, but Alex is crazy to do that. I'm going to do it my way. Then we'll see how that works, and I'll learn from you, as to whether that's working or not. Everything in nature, if we look at all of evolution, everything is adapting all the time. So there's certain kind of birds that only live in one little area of the world because they adapted to that area. There's ants that only live on one tree, and so, they adapt. So you should be adapting this idea, this core idea. And I love, there'll be core things that work and things that don't. And so, that's what we're trying to figure out. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, the big two takeaways I get are the difference between a show and a conversation. And then there's the combination of that as well. But the definite disciplines of entertainment, the concept of being on topic, but also the structural bones of good video, good audio, and good internet. I think those can be taken and applied to many disciplines. And there again, I obviously love the technology, entertainment, and design, the cross hybridization of concepts and ideas, because we push and prod each other.
I do think that there is something special about a well-practiced, intelligent panel that's larger, that's 13, 15, 25. The thing that I find most interesting about office hours is that I spent years, a decade, telling people to never have more than 6 people in a panel. And I was wrong. Well, maybe I was right then, but I was wrong now. When I did I really got clear of that doing the WWDC event, where we had only 5 or 6 people in the panel. It was so hard. Just in case you're wondering, I tried to make it look easy, but wow, that was hard. Because it just the question the answer velocity was so slow compared to what I'm used to. And I just realized we're used to an entirely different thing with this. And I don't want to listen to any 3 pundits or 4 pundits. I want to have a whole bunch. If we do this with medicine, I want to find 25 doctors. If we do this with politics, I want to find 25 people that do that. If we do it with cooking, I want 25 chefs, that are all bouncing off of each other and so on and so forth. I think it's just a better conversation than it was before. What we figured out here was how to structure that conversation so that it actually works, because almost anywhere else in the world, it's chaos. Like when you do that. So there has to be kind of a structure to process the conversation. And that's what we're figuring out here. The next step is figuring out how to make it look like a show. So we figured out how to do it in Zoom, and we figured out the process of that. Now we're going to turn it into something that looks like a TV show. And I think that potentially changes a lot of things for a lot of people. If something starts looking like a regular broadcast show, but it's incorporating 25 people and hundreds of people that they're interacting with live, that's a compelling solution that isn't just us talking about media and virtual production. Go ahead, Leland, and we'll move on.
It's funny you mentioned that, Alex, because I was kind of going there. We've been trying to get niche people to show themselves on live video and get that live engagement for years now. It took this event with COVID to show the world what was possible. And yet, like you mentioned, we used to tell people 4 to 6. That was it. You couldn't get the engagement right if you had more people than that. And we were wrong. We discovered in this year that it could be done with up to thousands of people if it was done right. And that's the growing that we did over this last, 2020, I think, was our growth as well, to learn that we had a concept that would work. We just didn't know how much it could scale. And now we realize that.
And what I'm not sure of is whether it scales with people who just do it once. Like, so if you're going to do an event once, getting a whole bunch of people that have never done this before to come in and do what we do every day naturally, I think would be difficult. So that's the hard part, is that it also, I think that when you start moving to a conversational broadcast like this, or a scalable conversation, that you then have to also think about, do we really need to do events once a quarter or once a year, or we should be doing them weekly or daily or monthly, or something where we build up a pattern. Now, I think that when we turn it into a broadcast and have it look like something, then people are really going to, I think, understand, like, wow, this is a crazy thing, that's all going on. And how do we make this available for our event? I think it spawns a whole different kind of event. But then I think that what you want to do is, what we have to do, and I'm thinking about this, is how do we quantify it? Like, what does the host have to do, and what does the team have to look like, and what is the, and what do you have to, how do you prepare all the panelists, and how do you, there's a whole bunch of pieces there that we're still figuring out of how to describe it. But I absolutely, to go back to the question, I absolutely think this is applicable to anything that people are interested in, and that's why we're doing it. But the easiest place, if you were going to do it, would be start with the people who have to make it, so that we all understand it. So we create it. Like if I started this with cooks, I'd end up with a bunch of cooks that thought this was a great conversation, but they wouldn't know how to make it again for somebody else. Whereas we all know how to make it. When we assimilate it, we're able to then do it, for lots of other people. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, as I look across the magazine aisle in a typical grocery store where you see golf and cooking and all these, and I think that this can be applied, but you got to give yourself credit for the years that you have of hosting. I mean, it's a different animal to say, hey, there's a Facebook group with 100,000 people and we should do this show every day. And then you take the admins or the mods and they might not be able to host, because it does take a certain amount to cut somebody off. I mean, you can't be too kind if somebody's going off the rails and you're just like, how do I reel him back in? It's like the fish that just took off and you're like, hey, he's gone.
Right,
and you're like, reel him back in.
And part of it is that you have to remember, as the host, you're the advocate for the listeners. You're not the panelist. I mean, you're friendly with the panelists, but your job is to entertain the listeners. Are you not entertained? And so is to make sure that the listeners are getting what the producers want, as opposed to what we necessarily want, or what our ego wants, or what what we want to say that we think is important. The host's job is to solve that, and I solve it imperfectly every day. Next question.
Chris Fenwick, our own Chris Fenwick, says, can we discuss a strategy that office hours could cover NAB? Teams of reporters and shooter streamers. Alex could be back at master control and switching between different feeds. Could be fun.
Yeah, I think that I'm pretty excited about it. So we talked about a little bit in the pre-show. I'm targeting, and I don't know if we'll do all of them. It depends on whether we can find sponsors and whether we can, because it'll cost money to do this. And so there'll be a bunch of things we have to figure out. But I'm looking at NAB, VidCon, IBC, and CES as 4 shows that I'm super interested in covering as a group. Without me going to any of them. So finding local members or people who want to be local for that week to run those. I'll give you a little bit of what I'm thinking about for NAB, and what the idea is that we'll evolve between them. So we'll go, well, that didn't work, or this worked. And I admit I have shot video at NAB for 15 years. So it's not, and so I have a lot of, and I've been, on Twit's, studio, and I've been on other people's studios, and I've got some opinions about it. One of the things we won't do is have 3 people sitting around a table. We're not, the people who, if you're participating, you'll come in. There'll be one person. Now there may be multiple cameras because you might be showing a piece of hardware, or you might be doing something else. But we'll build a kind of a little kit somewhere that people can do it. Whether it's on the floor or not is up for grabs. I think there's a value to doing it on the floor. I don't know if I'll do it at NAB, mostly because I don't like to show my notes. So I'd rather do it in a suite first time. But definitely within next year, by CES maybe we'd have a booth. But anyway, we want to bring vendors on to answer questions, so we can come in all over the world, and the vendors that we go out and pick are the ones that are that we want to bring in and have an hour conversation, with them. It's not going to be, we're not going to try to cover everyone. We're also probably not going to try to cover the biggest brands. There's some brands that are deep inside of what we do. So Blackmagic and Sound Devices, and there's a handful of companies that we use a lot. And so if they're releasing something new, we're going to want to bring them on. But outside of that, we want to look for the things that aren't in the big press releases, and things that you might find interesting, and things that we can explore. But it's a place for all of us to do exactly what we do in the second hour, which is ask questions, and let us ask those questions. And I think that we might end up with 2,000 or 3,000 people, watching that, and it'll be the best, hour for them that they get. Live. And so, and then I do want to have some live views or videos or whatever we end up using roaming around this, so that in between those, we get little bits of stuff, and we get to see stuff, and we wander around and do a little bit. But the goal will be, if it goes anywhere near what I'm hoping, it'll probably be 12 hours of streaming a day, and then possibly even recording a bunch of stuff that runs the other 12 hours. It just goes into play out. So no matter where you are, you turn it on. It's like a heavy coverage of what we're doing. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I get excited by the idea that a live camera could be walking around or looking at a booth, and then we're all typing in a bunch of questions, and then it's literally saying to the vendor, hey, we've got 300 people on right now, and I've got 10 questions to ask you, and and fire through them, and kind of that live interaction would be super cool. And
so we did this in Pixel Corps 12 years ago. So we did it 12 or 13 years ago. So this was what we had as a live view. Doug Dalton had the live view on, and he had an EX1 camera and a live view, and I had a wireless, I had an electrosonic mic and I had an earpiece, and I had just a phone call. And what happened was that we were wandering around NAB. We had a team. So the team so people understand how this worked. The team consisted of, there was the camera operator. There was one person that was kind of giving me signals if they needed to. Then there were 2 people that would stand on either side of us so that no one would cross the camera. So it looked like we were just shooting into it, but there were 2 people and sometimes 3 people that would literally block the lane. And that's their job. And people would try to cut through them, and they'd be like, no, it was, so it was like, nope, can't go here. And so you need to just go this way. And so they would push people around it. Then there were 2 other people that were going to the next booth. So it looked like I was just wandering around, but there was, so I know Liana Lahua she was the one that would do that, and she's very direct. And she'd be like, "We're coming to you in about 30 seconds, and you need to be ready, like because it's live, and there's like hundreds of people watching, and we're gonna come over to you, and you need to be. Do you have someone ready?" And she'd have them all like lined up so that they'd be ready to go. And then we would come over to them, and they'd be just standing there. Hey, how's it going? Can we talk to you a little bit? So it all looked like it was an accident. Like we were wandering around, but there was someone going out, and there was one person past Liana that was doing the same thing. And then Carolyn Stampine was on the other end listening to all these people just putting in questions. We didn't have any way to put the questions in. So they were like, I don't even know how they were getting. I think there was in vBulletin actually. And she would just read them into my ear. And so we did that all day. So much fun. Like it was literally the most fun that I'd ever had at NAB. Oh, this is some of it right here. So I can't believe that we have that footage. I don't even think this, I think this was a recording. I don't think this was the actual live shoot. Maybe, what is it?
I've got it. It said 2010. And
no, this was 20. Yeah, I think this was record. Was this live?
Are you talking about your rig?
Yeah.
I think it's just a rig video. Yeah.
Yeah. I think this was me.
HD camera rig.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. This is it. 2010. I thought it was 2008. But yeah, there was a little electrosonic. So that was me a lot there. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So yeah, I've also done the live stream thing, not to the level that you've done, but I was with the Tech Podcast crew, and we actually built. So I was soup to nuts on the whole process of getting a booth and putting things together. We ended up with 2-person crews. We ended up pre-recording and then bringing all the content back to a TriCaster, which then would get fed in and then ran when we didn't have guests doing interviews. The one thing that I'm going to stress again, that I stressed it in pre-show, is if anybody wants to join us, they might have an issue, and it's definitely with CES. You might have to go for a press badge
we'll solve
over
that.
a regular
I wouldn't worry
badge.
about that. If you're on our team, it'll get solved. I can solve that.
So, but that's
I'm
one
not worried
thing.
about that.
Okay, but
I can get you whatever
that,
passes we need. I mean, we'll get you exhibitor passes.
Other than that, yeah, it's a lot of fun. Great to have a team going as opposed to yourself. I've been going solo to CES for the last few years, and I miss the team effort.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun. I'm gonna try and be there. I got my press badge all ready to go. So.
Yeah, and it'll be great to have you there, Jeffrey. But I wouldn't worry too much about. We'll sort out the issues. I'm mostly worried about the financial parts of it. Once the financial parts are sorted out, we do need to know, and I'll put out I'm working next week, just so you know, the volunteer thing is taking a little time just because I have to figure out how to organize it all. But next week I'm in North Carolina, something that looks like a vacation, but I don't think it'll be very much of one. So, but I'm going to be one of the things I'll be working on is the structure of all the things we want to try to do and give people who signed up for volunteering a place to choose. Like, are you interested in this? And are you going to be in NAB? And are you going to be at IBC? And so on and so forth, so that we can figure out who wants to fit in where. And then we'll start to figure out what that looks like. But I think that we can do something that's pretty outrageous, as we go forward. Go ahead, Rupert.
So just a couple of things spring to mind. I guess some kind of back channel would be needed for something like that, comms to pull off a project like that. But also, if there's going to be like roaming cameras and people talking to vendors, maybe they could have some kind of larger format device, maybe an iPad, to show the gallery to get to present the sense that we have an audience watching, and here's your opportunity to address them.
Yeah, I don't think that. I think that we'll tell them that on the way in. I think what it does is it creates another layer of logistics that might be more difficult for us to manage. The wireless in the space is really hard. Like there's parts of around the Panasonic booth in the central hall that live views just don't seem to work. They might be different now. Post COVID, they might have done some work on it, but it was always like a dead hole. Like right, we get to the Panasonic booth, they're like, it doesn't work anymore. And so, just too much concrete. And so, anyway, so I think that the vast majority of the show, my plan is to have the vast majority of the show be in the suite, where people are bringing people up. And then my other thing is that I don't plan to try to do like, what does this all mean during the show? I plan to cover stuff and gather it because that's what we have there. Then spend the whole next week talking about what is the, what does this all mean? And so I think that's the thing that we'll kind of do a recap of that process. Go ahead, Jeffrey. Or I'm sorry, Ken.
Just in the organizing of the people and stuff. And I know you've already done it with the volunteer, but I can help you with that, with the form, and I can show you how it really makes it easy to organize afterwards the results.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I'm not so sure I agree with the suite idea. The problem with the suite, and I've seen this in the past, is you have to get people to, because it's so vast, I seem to be frozen. But anyway, because it's so vast, getting people to leave their booth, it takes them a long time to get to your suite and then get back, and they have to drag their equipment with them to, if they're going to demonstrate something. I think it's much easier for them to deal with you on the show floor. But
we won't have that many slots. So if you look at the grand scheme of things, we won't be able to have more than about 35 slots, out of thousands and thousands of folks. And part of the sorting process of who we cover will be who's willing to walk over. So like I create little hills for everybody all the way around. We're going to have a production quality that I will argue is much higher than everyone else. And for those who turn us down, it'll be a lesson for the next year. Our job is to make everybody look great and have this incredible experience for them. We'll get 35. I can make phone calls and get 15. That'll commit to it right now. So I can get. I'm not worried about getting people to do it. And I do think that the first time they do it, you're absolutely right. There'll be people who turn us down because they have to walk across the hall or whatever to do that. But I will say that if you're in the Renaissance or in the I wanted to call it the LVH, but in whatever the Westfield or what wing or whatever
Westgate,
that is,
I think.
Yeah, Westgate. If you're in one of those, the walk is not much further than going from the North Hall to the South Hall. Like, it's just really not that far to go. If you're going somewhere else, it's absolutely unusable. So we do have to find something in one of those two hotels if we're going to do a suite. If we can find a room that we can have in there, but the logistics of internet and processing and everything else that's inside and access, everything else that's inside of the hall is why I'm not super excited about. When we did them in suites, I've done many years in suites for other companies, and we haven't had any real trouble with it. And we can get so much more set up. The quality for the user is so much higher that I feel like it's worth just seeing who shows up, but I'm a big fan of, beating the hesitant with the first adopters. We'll do it that way. Go ahead. Because we're only bringing people in we're not bringing people in to grill them. We're bringing them in because we're excited about their product. And so when they see the videos of other people that do that, it just means that at IBC, VidCon and IBC and CES and the following NAB will be a lot easier. It'll grease the wheels, and you just think about it over time. We're going to go to the next question. We'll keep on talking about this, but we're running out of time. Next question.
Can I really quickly say that there is a Discord? There is a Discord NAB show.
Okay, and keep on talking about that. We're going to run a little bit heavy, but I do want to answer the questions, and we dug into this pretty deep. It was a good question, and Chris missed all of it.
But I just sat down,
yeah. So, we'll run it. We're running 10 or 15 minutes heavy, but we're going to go pretty fast. So just letting the panelists know. Next question.
Rupert McCrae, Dallas, Texas. The new work from anywhere opportunities have apparently created a set of so-called digital nomads, people who literally travel and work from anywhere, but reports are mixed. Does anyone have knowledge of this phenomenon?
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, so I've got a business partner. I've got a company here in Australia, and my business partner has been on the road for just over a year. So he's got two little girls, and they got a trailer. And they're just traveling around Australia, and he's doing awesome. There's been a few times with internet connectivity, but generally at like 95% of the time, it's been completely fine. And I'm totally jealous. I'm kind of tied down to this studio in my garage, but he's able to do all the sales and producing. He show calls a lot of our virtual shows, like all of that. He does it from his trailer. It works awesome.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill, and then Leland.
I mentioned before my wife used to be associated with a group called VIP Kids. It was a distance learning. They taught English to kids in China through full immersion. And many of their teachers were digital nomads. These were people who literally had nothing but a laptop, and they would do their English classes from literally all over the world. You never know where your teacher was going to pop up from next, but those teachers still had a relationship with their students and maintained a nice income from that.
Yeah. Leland, were you going to say something?
Yeah, as someone who's literally worked virtually since 1995, running my own businesses at home, it's just one of those things you kind of have to find a way to work your way into. If you have a niche that you're considering going global, you might say, and being able to work from anywhere alongside the pool on a laptop or whatever, it's really a matter of taking the technology and innovating your business to be able to work in that fashion. You have to kind of look at a new way of doing business.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I have a friend that works over at Warner Brothers in the, I guess, accounting, middle-level management stuff. And they've all been working from home for the last year and a half. And they just sent out a questionnaire to all those employees that have been working at home, which is about 90% of the workforce, if they wanted to come back into the office or not, or would they rather continue to work from home. And I think a large portion of them are going to continue to work from home. And they just built they're building a brand new office building to house them all. And now they're wondering what they're going to do with it.
It's good for the folks that come back in because they'll have more space. This whole open, part of the reason no one wants to come back is because the open office was a disaster. So the reason people don't want to come back is they had their own space and they were living in hell. Before they were being forced to work in a little hell that was created, that was justified by somehow we're going to interact more, and was really just to save money, so that's what the resistance is. What we see mostly is a 20, 40, 40, 20. 20 people never want to come back. 20 people absolutely want to come back. 40 lean against, 40 lean for, like they want to be kind of part in, part out. And by the way, I've been noticing that's kind of the world. It's 20, 40, 40, 20. Anyway, it's got a bell curve of opinion. Anyway, I have friends that did it for a decade. Like literally they homeschooled their kids. They sold their house. They lived in one of those, like, looks like a spaceship type of trailers, like giant, double expando trailer or whatever, that they'd go to whatever. And they just, every time I got on the phone with my friend, I'd say, where are you? Like, I'm in Canada. I'm in anywhere there's a road, he would take it. And it would just be, it seemed to be a dream experience. Like, I'm sure that there were troubles, but wow, it just seemed like it was just like they would be, I'm in the Badlands, or we're in the Grand Canyon, and if they wanted to study history or something for their homeschooling, they would just go there, it was, they just wander around. And so, yeah, go ahead, Rupert.
So I just asked the question because, like I say, you see kind of mixed reports over people really doing the traveling thing, and of course, then there's towns and cities that are really marketing themselves, as go-to places for Zoom towns. But even countries, like last year, some countries were offering like visa waivers to just come and work there, and hey, it's all good here, we got good stuff, and some people apparently went and did that.
Information workers, especially if they can keep their U.S. salaries, are really valuable to a lot of countries because they bring in taxes, or at least they buy lots of things. They may not pay the taxes there if they're not there, but they're still buying things. They're paying sales, paying VAT and sales and all kinds of other things. They're hiring other people to do things. And so it's valuable to bring in. Estonia, by the way, great bandwidth. Next question.
Gualberto in Santa Cruz, Bolivia says, how do you test large Zoom event setups beforehand?
Go ahead, Grant.
There's a couple of things to do. I mean, you can join office hours pre-show, and we can all fill up your Zoom meeting. The other thing to do is Zoom OSC. You can actually spin up. You can script it, and you can spin it up to set up a bunch of dummy instances or participants, and so you can kind of have 30 sitting in there, or you could get 49, so you can get your gallery view full with every setup. And so that's a good tip is Zoom OSC.
Oh, Rupert.
So if you're working in an organization, or you're working for an organization, they're organizing an external event, you can now find some internal volunteers, get a bunch of people together, run a test event. But also, if you are going to have speakers or contributors, you have to test them separately first before your event.
Yeah. And we've had an invaluable research just by asking everybody here to go somewhere. That's how we've done it. Let's go to the next question.
Gilberto's back from Santa Cruz, and he says, what's the process to enable 1080p reception and transmission over Zoom?
Go ahead, Rupert.
So first of all, for 1080p, you're going to need a business account, which is different to a pro account. It's a paid account you're going to need, and that requires you to have 10 seats at $20 a month. So you've got to make that commitment first of all. Then you have to make the request to Zoom to even enable that feature with a reason. You have to be doing something with production value and have some business case behind it. And then you need to ensure that you're using hardware that can actually deliver and receive the 1080p.
Go ahead, Grant.
There's some rumors that if you ask nicely, you can get a business account with less than 10 users. So it's worth talking to support about that.
Next question.
Vienna in Australia says, what's with the introduction of large group calls on FaceTime, how likely will FaceTime, will it be for FaceTime to be adopted for purposes outside of personal calls, such as business meetings and conferencing?
I think FaceTime has a long way to go to do that. I think that in smaller meetings, possibly some of the new interaction tools that Apple has released will slowly, but it's the large number of people interface for FaceTime is a disaster. Like they just totally flubbed that up. So I think that they have to get over a lot of things to do that. Go ahead, Bill, and then Rupert, really quick.
It's interesting to me that Apple in the webcasts I've been on for them uses actually WebEx, still I think a branded version of WebEx. And so I'm wondering if someday there's somebody in the skunkworks in the back who's trying to figure out something better than both of those, because I don't think they each work very well individually.
The fact that Apple uses WebEx for their internal stuff is probably enough for you to understand how far along they are for doing that, given that they're notorious for doing their own dog fooding. Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, that was basically my point. They have to use something internally, so why not that?
Next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis is next. When equipping a synagogue in his case, with multicam live stream capability, what are the advantages and disadvantages of A, a video booth in the back of the sanctuary, B, video production rooms just outside of the sanctuary?
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I live stream our church service every Sunday, and we just moved buildings, and being able to call the shots verbally instead of using hand cues is the biggest thing. I had to be completely silent when we were in the room, and now we're just off to the side, and I can say, hey, go to the wide, cut to a graphic. You know, it's nice being able to talk.
You go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I like the ones that are right next to the sanctuary, so that sometimes things come up where you got to run through that door and say, hey, and this is during rehearsal or during setup. This is not during, obviously, the service itself, but, you know, it's just nice to be able to get right through that door and get to everybody and be able to say something when necessary.
Yeah, the main thing is back of the sanctuary versus actually, I mean, to Guy's point, I always, in every production, want to be in a room where we can speak freely and it doesn't affect the production. So whatever that looks like, you know, whether it's back or side or whatever, as long as I know that I can, that we're in a separate room that preferably doesn't share the same AC, because I like it to be a lot colder. Those are things that are important to me, and be able to have tons of monitors up and things that wouldn't necessarily look pretty if they were around folks, I find to be much, much better. And most major churches that I've worked with that have production facilities have their own production room. You know, so some of them are really, really good. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas says, I was talking about Microsoft Teams again. He says Teams will be baked into the new Windows 11 taskbar for both commercial and consumer versions. Are we headed back to the antitrust days of Internet Explorer and Windows 95 through 98?
I doubt it. I don't think Microsoft is. I mean, they've done really well. I don't think they're in a position of antitrust anymore. I think they've kind of moved past that. Jeffrey?
Teams is already, with the latest update, Teams is already inside of Windows.
Yeah, I think that what's been good for them is the success of Apple and Google and Android and everything else that, you know, I just don't think that they have the kind of control that they used to. And I think that's why you have antitrust. But there's very few companies that have that anymore. Next question.
Sam Greenwood in Toronto says, following up on my last question, what's the most budget-friendly way to post-process the PR40?
Go ahead, Carl.
For live applications like what we do, the Mix Pre 3.
Yep. Go ahead, Bill.
And also remember, this is a recipe. It's not a thing. So each voice and each microphone is going to react differently. There is no one formula for this, but start studying up about compressors and filters and things like that. If you want your voice to sound better, you have to do it for your voice. There's not a preset.
And I don't process mine at all. I mean, I used to do this for a living, but I mean, I'm just saying that you don't necessarily, with a good mic, I don't know very many people, anyone with a PR40 that is within 3 inches of the end of the mic that really needs to do very much processing on their voice. Like, it's just not, it just really picks up your whole voice and does what it needs to do. So I wouldn't worry about that as much. I mean, I think you do an X2U, which is the Shure little USB interface, and pump it in. You make sure that you're not clipping. And I think that overall you'd be in pretty good shape. So I wouldn't worry too much about the process. If you're going to do that, you probably do it in software, not in hardware. Let's go to the next question. We're running a little low.
Sure. Douglas Carmichael says, how will the Mukana platform be marketed to outside clients? Will it be open sourced or marketed as a licensed software product or a cloud hosted service?
There'll be two products. One is something that you can manage events on like we do here, and one that is something else. So, the one that's customizable will actually may or may not be called Mukana directly. It may be called Commenda. To do what we're using it for at the moment, but it'll manage the people's events as well as possibly education platforms and stuff like that. And so, but there'll be another one that's a little bit different that we'll talk about in the future. Next question.
Nick Pavlinek is back again with, I started looking for a phone gimbal and was overwhelmed with the choices. Looking to keep the cost down. What should I look for?
Go ahead, Carl.
So the only one I would ever recommend is going to be the current DJI. The software is amazing. It's got, the hardware is kind of similar across a few of them, but the software is the kicker for this. And the current DJI, whichever one's the current hotness, that's the one.
The DJI gimbal is great. My only complaint about it is this whole thing that you have to register the app before you're allowed to use the hardware, I find to be obnoxious. So just know that if you're okay with that, then that's fine. And I do it. I mean, I complain about it, but just know that if you're one of those people that doesn't want, it will literally not turn on. It took me like 10 minutes to figure out why it wasn't turning on. It will not turn on until you put the app in and you register into the app. It is, especially from a Chinese company, that's pretty heavy-handed, so just know that you're buying into that when you do that. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I've tested the whole helm. I had that up there. I just I didn't have the hands, but that one, and then the Geotech starts with a Z. Both of those are pretty decent gimbals that are, a little bit less than the DJI.
Yeah. Next question.
Courtney Gooden of Hollywood here in the panel says, in the Windows 11 intro, they seem to indicate that the internet and Microsoft account will be required to install the home version, no local installs. Is this a problem for many people like it is for me?
I don't know. I don't do the home version. Yeah, go ahead, Rupert, and then Jeffrey.
I don't know about the Windows 11 specifically, but I know even in versions of Windows 10, when you went through the install, if you were connected to the internet, it would force you to register. If you were not connected to the internet, then it would provide you a way through.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the home version. The Pro version will always have the ability to do some sort of air-gapped type situation, especially when you have legacy information in there. Being able to do a lot more with the Pro, like remote controls and stuff like that, a lot of headless stuff. So I wouldn't even bother with home. If you're doing this for professional stuff, go Pro always.
And by the way, for listeners who might be just coming in, going, why are we not talking about USDZ? We just ran way behind. We got into a long conversation. We still have a policy of no question left behind. So we're moving pretty quickly. And within the next 10 minutes, we'll probably be back to USDZ. Go ahead, Courtney.
I just wanted to display my we work in, and this could be true for education as well, where we buy consumer laptops off the shelf and use them in motion pictures and television just as props. You have to turn them on and you have to put stuff on them. And so they have to be lit up. And they come with Windows Home on them, and I think they will come with Windows 11 Home on them. The problem is to launch them, if you have to tie them to your personal Microsoft account, I don't want all these laptops in the hands of all these extras or in the hands of all these students tied to my Microsoft account. So That's the problem. And you don't have any control over buying pro or something in a situation where you're buying consumer off the shelf products.
Yeah. Let's move to the next question. We're running out of time.
Douglas Carmichael is here, and he says, I've heard that Rocket Lab, the U.S. New Zealand-based satellite launch company, and SpaceX use Unity Intercom. Wouldn't a software intercom without redundancy not be appropriate for life-critical tasks? Apple says our products aren't fault-tolerant, quote, end quote.
Go ahead, Carl.
So Rocket Lab and SpaceX are using Unity for their live stream broadcasting, not for their space communications. So NASA has something called Scan. They've commercialized it too. So now whenever SpaceX are talking to NASA, when they're approaching the space station, they're using the NASA backend to scan the TDRS satellites or ground stations. But you are right, they're live streams, which they do for nearly every launch, of course. They're using Unity, so the director, the TD can talk to the talent on camera and all that. So that's true. They are using that for the live streams.
Yeah, but not the mission critical part. Next question.
JHB in New York City says, I'd love to see a second hour focus on behind the scenes of office hours and what hardware and connections it takes to produce it.
There's not much hardware right now, but as we go through the new update to 2.0, we're absolutely going to take you guys along the trip. We'll be constantly updating it and changing it and improving it. And there will eventually be an office hours production feed like you saw with Mad in the Kitchen, where every day you need to listen to the comms, because I expect to have 20 or 30 people working on it every day. As we go down, given the number of volunteers, we'll have a big crew, and you'll just be able to listen to all the comms as we kind of light the show up. So it'll be you'll decide which way you want to listen to the show. Next question.
And Douglas Carmichael has the next three here. Douglas says, what made Mickey or the host choose the WLM meter instead of a Doro meter as the office hours standard meter?
I don't know. You'd have to ask Mickey when he comes in, but we use it because Mickey used it, and Mickey uses it because Mickey's smart. and he makes smart decisions, and we just go, yeah, okay, there you go. Go ahead, Roscoe, real quick.
Yeah, Mickey customized it too and did a lot of stuff inside of it, so we like using that one.
Yeah, next question.
Douglas Carmichael again. Has anyone heard anything about low-level audio and video infrastructure improvements in Windows 11? The material we've seen does not mention professional production use cases at all.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So what we saw with Windows 10, with the different versions, Home and Professional, was that even some of the professional features in the professional version got pushed into Windows Enterprise. So I would look out for that in Windows 11 also.
Next question.
Charles Silverman in Richfield, Connecticut says, with many cameras now shooting 24 frames per second, what are the reasons to still shoot at 23,976?
Carl?
So let's say a TV drama in the United States is shooting at 24 frames a second. They're going to be shooting at 23 because it's 23.96, because that's going out to a broadcast over the terrestrial system in America. Feature films, which use cinematography feature cameras, will shoot at 24 frames a second because that's what the projectors and the digital projectors in the cinemas are tuned towards.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
If any of your audio is going to go through any kind of NTSC stuff, then the frame rate matching is much easier by doing 23.98.
Yeah, and this has to do related to 2997, 5994. So that divided by 1001 is divided by 1001 is the issue. So that's how you end up with those. It is interesting. I always find it fascinating that the 4048 is not actually accurate. So it's something that Avid decided to be 2398 and 48, and those aren't evenly divisible. So there's a lot of conversion that has to happen in the back end of a lot of the software to make that work. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael again, with platforms like SwapCard, which was used effectively for the Winter NAM in 2021, why do you think NAB is moving so aggressively back to an in-person show?
Money. It's just money. The problem is if it goes virtual, they don't know how to make money with that. They don't know how to support the infrastructure that's required to do that. NAM is a very small show compared to NAB. NAB is all of the convention center and the sands, and it's this massive beast that is, and CES and NAB and IBC to some degree are these just massive shows. And they make most of their money on that expo space, the vast majority of their money. And so if people start making their expo space smaller or don't come at all, it would be a disaster. Go ahead, Chris.
First of all, I suspect we're going to see some big names actually just not even show
I don't know, but I think that some names won't show. I definitely think you're right, but I think that the ones that have the biggest booths, I would be surprised if they drop out completely. But I think that there's a medium group and definitely small groups that I could see definitely dropping out.
It'd be interesting to see if Black Magic is as giant as normal.
I bet you Black Magic will be just as big, just because they like to show off, and they can. Go
They
ahead,
also
Bill.
had contracts, you know.
Yeah, Bill. The other, by the way, the other thing is you're taking a big risk as a vendor, because where you get to put your booth is based on how long you've been doing it. So you have status. So for someone to just drop out means that they'll lose their status and they'll be in the back of the hall the next year. That's not exciting for people. Go ahead, Bill.
Just remember also the economics of the entire infrastructure of Las Vegas. Those bonds that built things like the monorail were 30-year bonds. They're still amortizing off that cost. So if nobody shows up in Vegas to ride those things and generate revenue, a whole series of dominoes economically that support those huge casino hotels start to fall.
Go ahead, Rupert.
It'll also be interesting to see how many of the vendors that do have a booth choose to bring in some of their engineers, maybe via Zoom, or have little conference booths and try and some hybrid approach that way. And then that'll just get some gravity and take hold.
Or broadcast from their booth. Do the same thing we're doing, do a Q&A and everything else from the booth itself is something that they could be doing to make that work. The reason that hasn't happened, by the way, is because the internet for them is so expensive to get enough internet to do this effectively, that no one does it, because the LBCC charges so much, to tens of thousands of dollars to have your internet connection to your space that's secure and good enough to do it. And so that's an amazing way to keep everybody coming, but it also could be the end because of it. Next question.
Sam Greenwood in Toronto is next with, I just got the Galaxy Z Flip and really like the form factor. What do you think will be the next major innovation in smartphones, form factors and otherwise?
Relatively quick, Rupert, and then Carl, and then Chris.
More watches and more wearables.
Carl?
So 180 camera front and back.
Yeah, Chris? I can't hear you, Chris.
Liquid phones. Literally, you can put it anywhere. Liquid.
There you go. I mean, I think that a lot of the things that are interesting are what we're seeing is this evolution of our cameras. The 180-degree camera, possibly on each side, but just the amazing technological advances in the cameras on these phones. I mean, I'm just amazed at what they can do now. And so I think we're going to continue to see the camera is the number one way people decide what phone they want. And so Apple has hundreds of engineers that only work on that camera, and so computational photography is going to continue to be the thing that we just keep seeing get more and more interesting. Next question.
Nobody said ocular implants. I'm sorry.
David
Brady in New York said, dug up an old license for New Blue Titler Live and trying to link to the ATEM. When I full screen its HDMI program out blanks out the primary screen. Any tips from what might be the cause? 2018 Mac Mini with both displays going into an ATEM.
I guess my question, screen its HDMI program out. It blanks out the entire first thing I would do is probably run it through a decimator just to see what, like if it's just, I think it's some kind of errant signal. It's probably sending in a computer signal that the ATEM should be able to see, but doesn't like. Go ahead, Bill. Can't hear you.
Isn't that really old software? I just wonder if their code is so old that they weren't outputting the video signal correctly for the new world of computers that use things like the video APIs.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Alex covered most of it. Decimator might solve the problem. It's probably a frame rate or interlace problem, which will may cause the ATEM to choke.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'm wondering if he has it in ATEM input 1, which doesn't have the scalars, or if he has it as passing through. It does have the scalars, but he just should try 2.
Yeah, definitely always try. When something doesn't work in one is a different input than all the other ones. So if something doesn't work in 1, go over 1 see if it works. If it doesn't work in 2, come back to 1. But definitely check that out because 1 is a special input designed for gamers, and so you definitely want to know that going into it. If New Blue is like Playback Pro, they wrote their own, to what Bill was talking about, they wrote their own software to take full control. This is back when you didn't have enough control on the Mac to be able to do what you needed to do. So they just took over. They wrote their own engines. The problem with that is that as the engines move, as the overall graphics moved away from OpenGL and a lot of other of the libraries, it just really put them in no man's land. It really was a disaster for Playback Pro and for all of us using it. So I think that may be the challenge. And so, but I do think that, as suggested, if you go through with something like a decimator, it'll work out. All right, now we're going to, we have one more.
Yeah, Clive Kirchner in Souk, British Columbia, Canada says, sibilant S's. Mike is a Shure MV51. Alex recommended years ago setting on voice into a Mac Mini recorded in GarageBand. So he's got splashy S's.
Sibilance is yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So there's two hardware devices. One's made by ART. That's a little bit better because it has a tunable sibilance for female and male. And Behringer, if you want to go cheaper, the 2600 made by Behringer has a fixed male and male switch. So it has de-esser. So there's de-esser for the sibilance.
And I don't like the way that the MV51 sounds on voice. So I set it to music. So I don't use the voice compression. I think that you may find that you have less sibilance when you're using the music as opposed to the sound. The sound does some odd compression. I believe it's doing some kind of equalization and compression, band compression, that is making your voice sound more present, but with that presence comes sibilance. So I think that's maybe what you're running up into. So I would take that setting out. All right, now we're going to switch over. Now we're going to reopen the questions. We were never going to get to the bottom of that unless I close them. So we're going to go ahead and unlock the questions, but now it's only USDZ. So no general questions. So if you have questions about USDZ, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples of that, I think that it was, I don't know how popular this one will be, but I think that it was worth letting you all, jump into it and talk about it, because it's going to be something very important to a lot of us over time. I'll give you a little bit of an overview. I don't have a slide deck or anything. I just want to talk through it a little bit. And if anyone here wants to add to it, just raise your hand. USDZ is a format. It's a 3D format. And there's, there have been many formats that we've tried to do this with over time, that we've successfully done it with. OBJ was kind of, DXF was probably the early Autodesk version of this, where we were able to pass models to each other. Generally, DXF didn't really carry didn't carry very much as far as referencing back to the texture maps and so on and so forth. Then we had OBJ. OBJ was the wavefront format, and it carried an MTL file, which would allow us to pull, reference back. This is where your textures are, and this is how it all works. But it's still all these separate files. So you got all these separate files that you're kind of pulling in. Then in the early 2000s or late 1990s, early 2000s, we had FBX. And FBX was done by Cadera, who makes Motion Builder. They needed to move animation data. So they were like, we can't just have it be just this thing. We need animation data. And then Emblemic, which I've never had to use, so I don't have to think about it as much, carried more of that. Pixar, all along, as we kind of moved through this, started thinking through, okay, well, we need something to move the whole scene. So we need to be able to save out a file structure, a folder structure that's going to basically hold the whole scene, all the animation, all the lighting, all the surfaces, all the settings, all the geometry. Everything needs to be able to be in one folder structure. When I hit save to USD, you'll notice it's not USDZ. When I save out as USD, I'm going to create a folder structure that, if another app supports that folder structure, it'll be able to open it up and have all the data that it needs to do what it needs to do. And so Pixar spent a lot of time. Obviously, they have to move a lot of 3D scenes around. So they figured out how to do all of that. And then what Apple added, obviously there's a pretty close relationship between Apple and Pixar. And what Apple added to it was the Z, which is, let's zip it up. So basically USDZ is a zip. It's like, let's grab all these folders and zip them into one and treat them as a unit to that process. And so Apple did that. It's an open format. So when we talk about it, it's not an Apple format. It's an open format that anyone can use, but it carries an enormous amount of data. So what we're probably going to see over time is more and more, probably this is going to be one of the biggest file formats that ever. maybe the biggest one ever. And so you heard it here first. So this is the reason we're doing it now, is so that you can start thinking about it long ahead of everybody else and start playing with it and start putting it together, because most likely this will take over. And that has to do with a lot of one of the big reasons is that it's because Apple is suddenly backing it. You've had before this, you've had a bunch of 3D companies doing the best they can and everything else. Now you have a consumer company that's basically slowly putting it into everything. So, right now you can literally open a USDZ file in preview on the Mac. You can open it when you double click on it, it'll open Xcode if you have Xcode. And Grant here is showing you a TV. And Grant, I assume you downloaded that from the
yeah, just from the Apple store. Like that's developer.apple.com, and they've got a bunch of models there. They're downloaded, and then actually another example of not using Chrome and you needing to use Safari is you open it in Chrome and it just opens the code. You open it in Safari and it downloads it, and then you can just open it in preview.
Right. So there you have it. And so it's a, this is a kind of a cartoony version, but what it does do is it carries an enormous amount of data with it. So it's environmental data and, texture data, normal data. And again, if you have questions about what I'm talking about, go ahead and post those questions out. But all the texture data that you need to produce something. Now, one of the things that you will see is a little bit of a challenge is when Grant moves that, you'll see little aliasing along the edges. And this is something that most of them don't render very well yet, which is long polygons tend to create some aliasing. Although it seems like the newest version of Motion doesn't have the same problems that it had when it first came out. So, I got to do some more testing on that. But one of the things that's important is that there is a couple tools that you can use as well. And I'll see if I can open one up here in a second. But there's a thing called reality converter, which will convert any OBJ that you may have into an USDZ, and let you resurface it and so on and so forth. And there's reality creator, which is going to let you, reality creator, that's going to let you kind of build into scenes. And more importantly, though, from our perspective, and I'll open this in a second, is that you can actually use it in Apple's Motion as well as in Final Cut. So you can actually bring 3D models in and interact with them very, very interactively in Scene. Now we're going to see a big arms race here because Adobe's going down the same path. I don't know if you saw that Substance 3D was released or was announced, I think yesterday or the day before, and they've been doing this for a long time. And so Adobe's building its own tools to kind of go down this path. So we're going to see kind of an arms race between Adobe and Apple, and hopefully they both win. So for us, the Adobe one looks like it's got a lot of great tools to work. And we may get Sebastian the guy on. He's someone I've known for a while, and he's kind of the force behind the Adobe stuff. So we anyway. But as we think about it as designers with USDZ, the ability to bring it into Motion and animate it, and I'll show you this in a second, the ability to bring that into Motion and animate it, or bring it into Final Cut. So you can build something in Motion, export that, as Alex Goldner has shown, export that out into Final Cut, and Final Cut has the 3D engine to support this. Now, you might wonder why Apple is putting USDZ into Motion and Final Cut. And the reason that we want to pay attention to it is because, well, it'd be really useful if you were doing a lot of AR. You now have an AR authoring package, and so that is most likely where this is coming from, is that the ability to put 3D models in and be able to interact with 3D models, immersive video, so on and so forth, into Final Cut and Motion is going to be very, very important for Apple. And I'll keep on again, one of the reasons that we're talking about this is that AWS, or not AWS, I was looking at something that says AWS on it because I'm going to show you that in a second, that Jesse built, that AR is going to be bigger than the phone. AR is a massive market coming, because it means that, think of all your shopping experiences, all your learning experiences. I want to see whether all the stuff that a lot of us have talked about for 20 years, I want to see what this looks like in my house. I want to see what this looks like over here. I want to learn about this. I can go to a location and be able to see 3D model things pop up, and this is what this is, and this is where it goes, and even arrows to the hot dogs, all those things are all going to be 3D, and all of those things are going to be things that you build in these tools. And I also think that when the rubber really meets the road is when the Apple Office apps support USDZ. I don't know when that's going to be. I don't know if it's going to ever happen, but it seems very obvious that it would, given that they're putting it into everything else. At some point, we're going to see 3D models inside of Keynote and inside of Pages and inside of even Numbers. And when we start to see that, the number one is that I would never, ever want to present on PowerPoint after someone who has USDZ and Keynote presented in front of me. Like it's going to be a devastating problem. I've already started doing things that I render out in motion. I put it into motion, I render it around, and then I put it into Keynote, and it looks pretty good. And so with alpha channels, so the authoring of that is going to become pretty astounding. Anyway, so I'm gonna grab a couple things. Oh, now we got questions lining up here. So let's go ahead and jump into those questions first while I pull some stuff up.
Okay, our first one comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, "How is the USDZ file format used outside 3D specific workflows?"
Right now, it's not used in many 3D workflows, non-3D workflows, except for Motion and Final Cut, which is where it's already being made available. So, and you can then have a lot of the tools inside of those environments to just add it to your video. Next question.
Next question comes from Pete in Seattle, and Pete says, "What is the better USDZ quality ingestion device, the iPad M1 or the iPhone 12 or something else?"
It's anything that will do photogrammetry. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, you don't need a powerful device to view it. I think it would display identically on an iPhone 11 as it would on the new M1 iPad Pro. So what I love is how it'll pop up. I've messaged USDZ file to my wife, and it'll just pop up within messages, and you can either spin it around or you can hit the AR button and you can place the object on anything in your environment.
And if you want to see what some of this looks like, take a picture of or take your iPhone 12. If you have an iPhone 12, what you want to do is take an iPhone 12 out and go to the Apple site, just search USDZ Apple, and you'll get to their example site. Click on one of those objects, and you'll literally see it appear. You can literally place it in your space today. So this stuff is not. We're not saying, oh, someday this will get supported, or someday it'll go somewhere. This is something that is happening right now. As far as how that goes, and so that's it's a pretty powerful tool that's already here. Next question.
Bobby Rafferty in Rockville, Maryland is up next, and Bobby says, oh no, I'm sorry, I've got the wrong question here. Pete in Seattle first says, "What's the better USDZ quality?" And I'm sorry, I missed a button. Bobby Rafferty in Rockville, Maryland says, "Is USDZ an object or a container? And what kind of interactivity can you do with the format besides a viewer?"
Well, it is a container. Yeah, go ahead, Leland.
Yeah, it's basically a reference to a lot of 3D data that allows you to not only contain that format exclusive and carry that file structure to other places, but it allows for collaborative work efforts because that information is layered. People could be working in one part of that USD file structure while someone else is working on another part at the same time. So it does help build collaboration.
Yeah, but so and what you can do with it, of course, is once you bring it into you can animate it. You can do all the other things that are there. It's not something that's self-contained. Once you have that 3D object, you can do a lot of things with it. Next question.
And our friend Alex Goldner in London, who has moved beyond 3D to 4D, will USDZ formats be bigger than PDF, bigger than Word docs, bigger than HTML?
Yeah, over time, and it's not so much they'll be bigger; that the more people will use them. That's not really the point. It's that they'll have bigger impact. That's it's the impact that I think is important. And again, there's so little content that that works in this area right now, that there's going to be this huge gold rush. I mean, if you're building models, if I wasn't so busy, I'd probably start building a modeling farm, to figure out how I was going to have lots of people model it, because people say, oh, well, there's tons of models already. But the problem is that you're going to want models to look a certain way. When you're doing a keynote, you want to have a collection of models that represent the kind of thing you want to do, but it's going to have a certain look to it, not just any old 3D model that you could find, because most of those have been done at a fairly low quality. So rendering it, building it for USDZ to look great for a consumer who doesn't know anything about 3D, or a video person who doesn't know anything about 3D, be able to drop it in and have it look great, that's going to take work. And that work is going to take people, and those people, there's a lot of, it could take thousands and thousands of people, because it's not going to happen right now. But the reason we're talking about this right now is to get ready for it. For us to think about, oh, I might be interested in this, or and for us to start playing with this in small bits, because there is a huge market coming, for us if we choose to take advantage of it, because it's when it hits the Office apps, the keynotes, the pages and everything else, is when this thing is just going to go, there's going to be huge markets of people who want to buy this stuff, because for people who are trying to competitively present, it's going to be something that they need. So the other thing to know is that there's a lot of OBJs out there, OBJ and USDZ. If you go to the Smithsonian, and maybe someone can post the link to it, the Smithsonian has tons and tons and tons of OBJ materials that they've already done, and you can convert those OBJs directly into USDZ. So those are all things that are applicable right now to grab onto it. I'll show you a couple things here. I'm going to just try to. I think this will be easier if I drag it over. So grab this. Let's take just a second here. Of course, I was like, oh, I have this all figured out, and then I didn't. So just give me a second here. Let's grab this, pull this over here. So this is I'm working on this little video that I'm going to get out eventually, which is, let me cut to it here. There we go. This is the Elemental. This is the new link that Jesse actually built. So this is a. Make sure I got my mouse in the right place. So this is a 3D model, and this was Jesse built this from from a couple pictures. So I just took a couple photos. Now this wasn't photogrammetry. This is Jesse grammetry. And but this is a 3D model that I now have, and what I'm going to be doing is using this inside of to build this little thing about it, to talk about it here. And here, if I grab onto. Let me turn this view. Let's see if I can turn on grid here. This is what you'll see here is there's that model there, as well as a shoe that I thought I'd throw in there. But what you can see is that this, the shoe is also in 3D, and this is in motion. So I now have a 3D object in motion, and I can of course animate all those parameters as I'm working through it. And render them out. And so, it's a pretty, I do find that the motion tools are not as easy to use as I'd like them to be, but anyway, as a 3D, anyway, so what you can see here though, is that I have these 3D models. I can animate them at this point, and I could animate those inside of motion, or I could animate them inside of Final Cut. Once I save this out, if I save this out as an effect, I could actually put that together. So and again, for when you start thinking about, we were talking about education, I think in the pre-show, I don't know what we're talking about in the show. Once you get this into a video file format of something that I can interact with, one of the things that I can do, if we look at this here, is I can go here and no, I don't have something on. Anyway, let's go to the next question. I'll come back to that thought here in a second.
Sure. Pete in Seattle says, does Unreal, or Unity for that matter, ingest USDZ?
Does anyone have that answer? I actually don't know. I think that if they don't now, they will soon. I know that everybody, almost everybody's working on being able to support it, but I'm not sure. Next question.
Jason Panks in Nashville, Tennessee says, what apps do we need to create and use USDZ? Can we use an iPad or a Mac or what? What's required?
Go ahead, Jesse. Oh, can't hear you, Jesse.
Yeah, I was just trying to get out of gallery view. So you can use Blender for the modeling. And then I saved it as a GLB. I was having better luck as a GLB, which I don't know its history at all. I didn't know the history of any of the file formats until Alex, you just talked about it. So it was pretty interesting hearing that. But my workflow would be Blender, which is a free 3D package. You save it out as a GLB, and you can import that using Reality Converter, a free Apple app. And that's it.
Go ahead. Oh,
yeah. I mean, that's the process. It's just, you really just need 2 free pieces of software. Because I'm more experienced with SketchUp, I did start out in SketchUp, but I found that Blender is a better modeling package for most objects than SketchUp is. SketchUp is very popular with architects because it is quick and it's great for square buildings or things that are just planes. But where I ran into the limitation with that AWS box was that it's got cooling fins that have a double bevel. I could do a single bevel in SketchUp. I couldn't do a double bevel. So there's that aspect that is not as good as Blender. The other is that SketchUp is very limited in what you can do with materials. Blender is a lot better. And I struggled. I actually spent, it looks like a very simple model, and it's embarrassing how long it took me to, I really worked on it for a week. Not full-time for a week, but a good chunk of hours for a week. Part of it was just getting my workflow down. Part of the issue is that there's scant information about what your workflow should be, surprisingly to me, because there was a big announcement at WWDC, but wow, did I have to go through searching all over the place to even find out file formats that Reality Converter would use, because theoretically, I know it's thought that it can use an OBJ with the MTL, the material file, but that did not work for me. I don't know if it was the way SketchUp was generating the MTL file, but Reality Converter would not accept those file formats. So somewhere I found a YouTube video about somebody talking about GLB, which is a file format I never heard of, but that worked flawlessly, bringing it into Reality Converter, and Blender supports that.
And the if you look at this here, like one of the things that we can deal with is now that's in video and I can move it around. When you think about education, being able to circle things and talk about things and do this over top of it, and being able to then move the object and talk about the fact that Jesse was talking about these fins that that are being used as heat sink. We can talk about the fact that there's we got power here, we've got the HDMI here, and of course SDI. And so the idea though is that you can really draw over this interactively while talking, and kind of describe what you want to say. So, and of course this can be, again, any object. You'll see a lot of different objects coming out. Now there are ways to make it, other ways to generate that content. Doesn't have to be, Blender. For a lot of content, what you're seeing with Smithsonian is also photogrammetry. And so that photogrammetry, and I believe that reality capture is now free. I believe that Unreal made it, or Epic made reality capture free. so which we thought would happen eventually. We just didn't realize it would happen so quickly. And so I believe that that reality capture is free, and that's going to give you a place where you can generate models. Now, I don't know if it generates USD models on its own yet, but it will. If it's anything that generates OBJ, can be used to it. Now, coming out of SketchUp or Blender and as an OBJ was a little challenging, and some of that had to do with alpha channels and blacks, and what you try to composite onto the texture can be a little bit difficult. Like if that was all one matte, it generally will work. If it's lots of little alpha channels, it tends not to work. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, within Reality Converter, you actually can apply materials. The problem is you don't have a lot of control. So there are materials called PBR, which stands for physically based reality, something like that.
Physically based rendering.
Rendering, yeah. So you can apply them. And within Reality Converter, it's a very simple interface, again, free from Apple. You can apply not just the texture, but the displacement map, the metalness. There's maybe 6 different areas where you can load in a texture. And there are sites on the internet where you can get these PBR materials for free. So you can create extremely photorealistic, cool looking models just building the materials within Reality Converter. The problem becomes when you need specific texturing control, when you have things like text, within Reality Converter, there's not really an ability to manipulate how that texture gets put on the object.
Right.
So that's the limitation of only using that package and not using something like a Blender.
Well, you do need something to set those textures up. So you're not going to place the textures in there. You're going to set them up and have them as an OBJ and output them. So one of the things that you definitely want to watch the video of is the Apple's object capture. So it's really designed for coders. And what we're probably going to see in the next 2 or 3 months is a ton of tools on your iPhone that will let you capture objects. So Qlone, or it's like clone but with a Q, is one of the ones that's been pretty far out in front, and I believe they're going to be one of the, if they aren't already supporting the new architecture, they will be soon, because Apple mentioned them in the keynote. So they'll give you a pattern that you can actually take pictures of, and if that pattern's underneath it, then it's something that will show up. And so the you can use photogrammetry to create a lot of these models, which means you don't have to know how to model at all. Jesse knows how to model. You don't have to model. You can take pictures of things and turn them into models. Especially what's interesting is things that are hard to model, like organic structures, not like leaves, but like rocks and statues and things like that. Those tend to actually be easier to photogrammetry, use photogrammetry for, because they tend to have a lot of texture to them, and the photogrammetry has a lot of places to grab onto it, and they're irregular. The irregularity actually makes it easier for the photogrammetry to work. So you can take a lot of those photos and turn those into 3D models. And we're going to talk more about this. This is kind of an introduction, introduction hour of talking about this, but we're going to definitely have some lab time later this summer where we're all going to kind of work through that. Right now, there's a command line tool that will let you run the photogrammetry. You can take all the photos and then feed it into a command line tool, and it will give you a 3D model on the other end. It reminds me of when back in the day when we used to do QuickTime VR. QuickTime VR, it was the same thing. We'd load stuff into a script and run it, and it would give us a QuickTime VR on the way out. So anyway, so it's a really interesting format that I think we're going to end up doing a lot with. And again, for some of you, for a handful of you that are watching, if you think this is interesting and you're excited about it, I would get into it now. When it's hard. It's really fun. A lot of people who do a lot of stuff with drones, they got into drones when it was hard, not when you don't want to get into things when everybody else is getting into them. You want to get into them so that you have got your head around it and you really understand it when there's a demand. Luck is when opportunity meets preparation. And so what I'm kind of trying to set up is like, hey, this is a big market. If you start, you don't have to start preparing 40 hours a week, but if you start spending, 5 to 10 hours a week playing with this, you might get to a point. And if you have a lot of time on your hands right now, it's definitely worth diving into and getting smart, and it's good for us to get smart together related to it. So you'll see me playing with it a lot. I've been playing with photogrammetry since the mid 90s. So you'll see me playing with it a lot. And I think that everyone else should be thinking about it, because it's just a massive market that will add to our video production or will make it our job. Next question.
Alex Goldner in London is up next with, can USDZ encode interactivity rules?
The tools can do that. I don't think the USDZ carries the interactive tools on their own. But the software can then interact with it and create interactive experiences from it. I don't believe that the USDZ will carry those tools with it. Again, this is the introduction. We're going to probably bring USDZ folks in to talk more about it, and I just want to kind of get people's head around it first. Next question.
Craig McFarlane in Boston, Massachusetts said, could USDZ be used for virtual sets to then place live people in perspective as the camera moves, like Mandalorian does?
Remember that USDZ is a file format, so sure, it can do that, but it's the software that you're going to use to put it behind it that you need to have the control to make it tie in. Mandalorian it was using Unreal in the first season. Now it's using ILM's own software for it, so the USDZ to get it there Yeah, sure. But USDZ is not an application. It's just a file format. So you still need an application that's going to match the cameras and track the cameras and do the lighting and do all the other things that are required. Go ahead, Leland.
Just since Unreal was brought up, I was poking around while we were talking, and you can bring USD files into Unreal in both the binary or USDC versus USDZ. The compressed version, non-compressed, it's just a captured version, all inclusive. You can open those in the stage editor, which allows you to manipulate the real-time USD file rather than actually creating an actor within Unreal. But if you use the Python import export, you can then bring that USD file in. The only problem with it, if you export out using Python, you're going to lose a little quality based on the way that Unreal handles the USD file. So I left a link for those who can't see the Mukana stage. Go take a look at that, or you could search USD in Unreal 4.
Next question.
Jason Panks in Nashville says, can we take a real life object and create USDZ to bring into a Keynote or other app? He's thinking of product demos.
Yeah, so the way you would do that now, if you had a real life object, the first step you would probably do is do some version of photogrammetry. So you would use either reality capture or Metashape or the object capture or the many apps that are going to come out in the next couple of weeks on the iPhone to do this. And by the way, the reason that the iPhone is going to be so interesting in this area is that this isn't just like they'll say, oh, you can use a drone or you can use take a picture. You can use a DSLR or a drone or anything else to grab the imagery. When you use the phone for an object, it's using the LiDAR, it's using multiple cameras, it's doing a lot of gathering of data that I've never even seen that before of having that kind of data in a little phone. So it's actually using up everything that the phone has to offer, to gather object data. So it should make it a lot easier for you to grab those objects. Right now, you can't get 3D objects into Keynote. You can get them into Preview, but not Keynote. You can get them into Motion, though. So from Motion, you can export the 3D move that you want to do. You're still stuck with a 2D image, but let's say you want to do something that's going to rotate something around and have you look at it. You're able to do that with inside of Motion. And then you can render that out with an alpha channel from Motion and bring that into Keynote and hit play and it'll work. And the cool thing about that is you're like, well, why don't I just get a video? It is just a video, but it's a video that you can make yourself relatively easily. $50 application that will let you build your own animations of your own demos is really powerful, to be able to play with that. Next question.
Keenan Campbell in Princeton, Illinois says, can we do a Motion USDZ Saturday lab?
Yes. Yeah, we'll do that soon. This is the introduction to that, and we'll set up a USDZ place inside of Discord, and we'll start playing with it. But we will definitely do a lab, probably in August. Right now, I'm spending most of my energy on getting the new 2.0 kind of off the ground, and then in August we're going to start doing labs again. Next question.
Comes from Marius in Johannesburg, South Africa. He says, have you guys checked out the new app? And it's photocatch.app is the URL. Yet works only on Mac OS Monterey. So waiting for the PowerBook, I guess, to try it out. Last time I played with stuff like this was with QuickTime VR. Can't be PowerBook. I wonder what PB is.
It does for a lot of us that did. I haven't seen this object capture made easy. I'm going to play with that immediately. I haven't seen it before, but I'm glad that you pointed it out because it looks great. So I think that, but it looks like, I guess it said he said it was only for Monterey, requires Monterey. Does it really? My guess is that they're already using, some of these tools, and you're going to start to see some examples of what this looks like. But again, hopefully, as you start to look at this, you're going to realize, and when you watch if someone can post into Mukana the Apple's object capture session from WWDC, you'll see that it's capturing enormous amounts of data on the object. It's really like they pulled out all the stops to make that work. Next question.
Sorry, double mute. Mark Giuliani and Alexandria, Virginia says, what tools do you use to convert files in the OBJ format to a USDZ file?
Reality Converter. And so you need to have the developer account to do that. But Reality Converter is the easiest one. Once you have it already, all the textures done and surfaces and everything else, and you want to just convert from OBJ to USDZ, that's the easiest way to do it right now. Yeah. we've looked for a bunch of other ones. It's going to get easier. So Cinema 4D and other companies have already announced support for USDZ. So there's going to be a point where you can open it in Cinema and save it out in USDZ, and some of that stuff's coming very soon. So so there's other ways. There will be other ways to convert it even more effectively, but it is but it's kind of a work in progress. The easiest way, the cheapest way to do it right now is the reality converter. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, could you use USDZ to encode scientific models like 3D molecular models?
Absolutely. If you've got parametric data for those pieces, you absolutely can do it. So you can take, as long as that, I don't think it'll take the raw scientific data, but if you're generating 3D models with that, molecular structures or proteins or whatever, DNA, all of those things, if there's a 3D model of them that comes out, there's a way to visualize it. And there's some great apps. I mean, that's probably something else that'd be fun for us to show. I can't remember what molecular, I think it was called molecular. There was a piece of software that we used that you literally put in the chemical formula, and it builds the 3D model of it and then exports it out as a model. And I just can't remember the name of
Molecular Structure 3D. That was the iPhone one, my iPad one.
No, this was an old Mac app that would do this. It might have been a PC app that we used for it. We had a client where we had to do lots and lots and lots and lots of molecular animations. And so we had this one tool that was quirky, and we had to go through some kind of conversion process. So like there was nothing easy about it, but we were able to produce a lot of them. Next question.
Pete in Seattle is up next, and he asks, if you are going to build a capture farm, what do you need? Would a powered Lazy Susan, green screen, and good lighting suffice?
I don't even know if you need a green screen. In fact, you probably don't, from a texture map perspective, need or want a green screen. One of the advantages is that the camera is going to know, because of the LiDAR, it knows what's in the foreground and what's in the background. And that is transformational for a lot of us. For us to be able to know what is the object and what is the background is a big deal. Motorized Lazy Susan, so I haven't played with it yet, but what I think is happening, looking at the Apple demos, is they have I don't think that they're activating the Susan, but there's these ones for object capture that turn and stop, turn and stop, turn and stop. And so what they're doing is they're setting it up so that the camera is taking pictures at the right interval to just have it turn and stop, turn and stop, turn and stop, turn and stop. So you hit go. And I do think what we're going to see are people building capture stations with these Lazy Susans, where you can literally just throw objects on. Again, this is going to be a machine that starts to happen where people are going to, take and think about it this way. For occlusion, when you have an object, let's just make it. This is not a great example, but if we have an object of this, we may want you may want a higher angle, a mid angle, these different low angles here. These could be 4 different cameras. When we start really getting into what this is going to look like, you're going to end up with 4 or 5 phones that are all pointed at this object, that are run by one application, one USDZ application, and lit and basically, and we've already seen this with regular cameras, but it's going to be a lot easier with the phones because you can run the apps on them. You're not doing external control or whatever. They can all talk to each other and do everything else. Then what they're going to do is they're going to activate the Lazy Susan to either run at a certain interval, or they'll tell it when to turn. And basically you'll have it'll take all of these photos. It'll take 200 photos in, a minute, that are of an object, and it will get an enormous amount of data about this. And then you throw it, and then I'll just process in the cloud, or process on your Mac, or process on your phone, or whatever. It'll just build those 3D models, and you're going to end up with and there are, when you look at what Apple's doing, there is low resolution, medium resolution, there's full resolution, which isn't full, it's just a lot. And then there's raw. And so the raw data, I'm sure, is millions and millions of polygons for post-production. So Apple's not like going, they're not building a fun toy. They're building like a real production pipeline, to make this work. Go ahead, Courtney.
Maybe since photogrammetry has gotten so much better, but a lot of 3D scanners used to have a projector built in, which would, coupled with the motorized Lazy Susan, would project a pattern onto the object, which it would capture to generate. But I think maybe the photogrammetry has gotten good enough to generate the point cloud without the patterns being.
Number one is it doesn't photogrammetry can generally do a lot of that on its own now, and you didn't have LiDAR on the phone. Like this is like so that having the LiDAR on the phone is because that grid was in lieu of a laser scan, which you now have.
Well, so the LiDAR is really actually projecting a grid onto it.
It's
just
essentially
instead
a
of
really high resolution grid that is low resolution from a LiDAR perspective, but a high resolution compared to what we were doing before. And especially because you're doing it at a close range, that kind of a close area. The fact that it's not as dense doesn't matter, because it's where you really see the low resolution of the LiDAR on the phone is when you're shooting in a scene, of a room or something like that, because then the little angle that's between it is a lot of distance out there. But when you're looking at an object, it's not that much distance. And so there's a lot of, it's again, and eventually you'll see this in eBay. Like I just want to rotate my object around and look at it and make sure I know what it looks like. And people will assume that they're going to get it. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, so lighting is still critical, but is the background and the LiDAR age matter at all?
You want it to be, it's easier if it's not something complicated. Like it still is going to be easier for it to get the right edges. If you put it, I still think you're better off in for most objects, you're going to be better off in a white cyc, some kind of white cyc or black cyc or something that's just not going to interfere with the edges as it starts to work. It's more of a reflection and the impact on the object than the actual knowing what's in front and what's behind, which it can do fairly effectively. Next question.
Mark Giuliani in Alexandria, Virginia is back with, does Microsoft or Autodesk have something similar for the Windows environment that creates 3D objects that can be dropped into PowerPoint?
We don't see anything like that yet. It's an enormous amount of work, and it will be really hard on the Windows platform to support it. We can't even get H.265 to work on the Windows platform. I mean, it's like you have to do a somersault to get H.265 to work on the Windows platform. So, and then you have to deal with, the big thing is that Apple users tend to upgrade faster, their operating system. So your market tends to be much larger, very, very fast. And so this will be a huge lift on the other platforms to do it. It's not that it'll be impossible. They definitely will need to, but I think that I wouldn't be surprised if the Mac version of PowerPoint ended up at some point putting USDZ, because what's coming, I mean, what would be typical is there's going to be some point where USDZ becomes just another media container. So if you're a programmer, you're not thinking about, oh, do I add USDZ? It's like, I can add an image here, I can add a movie here, I can add a USDZ here. And so they don't, so theoretically, Windows, the only problem that Microsoft would have is they could probably drop it in to the code to support it on the Mac, but they couldn't support it on the PC. And so that's going to be a real problem on their end. But I don't see how, if PowerPoint doesn't support it, I don't see how they stay competitive. Like, Keynote's already way out in front from a quality perspective, but it'll get much, much worse if they have USDZ. Next question.
Fred Eric Eckert in Bad Herrenau, Germany says, it looks like Houdini, the program, supports USDZ natively. Could you export a ready-to-use USDZ file there?
I don't actually know if Houdini supports USDZ yet. USDZ has been around for a while because it's been a Pixar format or Pixar thing. So if anything there's a lot of applications that will support USD and USDA and USD. There's a bunch of different versions of it, but USDZ is something that's coming up fast, and it's just a lot more convenient from a consumer perspective to push it out. So I don't know whether all the animation firms will support USDZ, but I think they will eventually. And definitely as a consumer format, I think this is going to be the way that you provide 3D models to other people, especially just for review. Next question.
Guy Cochran, our friend in Seattle, says, can you go inside an object?
You sure can. I mean, just a 3D object. I don't know if I have a good.
Here's one of the things off of the Apple site. This is a tent that's something that you can go inside of and see, what's inside that tent. And just one of the things off the Apple developer site that you can play around with.
And remember that you can, one of the things that I've had people do is use, like Polycam or whatever, shoot something and literally text me a location that's rough, but text me a location because they had LiDAR, it has scale. And when I pop it, if I have it in my backyard, it will literally put their kitchen. I had someone send me a kitchen, Sky sent me a kitchen. Sky sent me a kitchen. I went outside and I just popped it up and I had a full scale kitchen. I'm walking through. I'm just walking around inside the kitchen, inside of Madeline's kitchen. And Sky just, I think, did you use Polycam for that, Sky?
It was the 3D app that you suggested, the 3D scanner app.
3D scanner app, and that worked great. And so I have an idea of what that's going to be like, and I have an idea of space and what it's going to feel like, and how much room is in places, and that's already available. Like that's not something that, and that's like that's a phone and just wandering around with the phone. Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, on the Apple site with all those models that they've posted, it'd be great if they had a cello. That, my friends, is called a callback.
or a banana for scale. So, all right, next question.
Sky Gleason says, why are these tools so inexpensive? Where's the return on investment for Apple on this?
Oh, it's a platform. Yeah, I mean, it's being able to people to do new things with their hardware and whatever new hardware Apple might be working on. This is the most systematic rollout of AR of anything that I've ever seen. We've been talking about it now for years, and it's just slowly turning the heat up. Like it's not too fast, not too, like just like this slow heat. It's kind of an amazing thing. And you're seeing lots of, I know that, I don't know what Apple's doing, but I do know that AWS or Amazon has like lots and lots of people in Seattle that are building 3D models of objects, and I don't even know where those go. But I know that they're building thousands of them, and there's whole warehouses, that this whole, like, let's capture objects to show if they work in your house. There's whole warehouses in China that are just taking pictures, of like this, so this is already something that's happening in mass. And imagine when you start thinking about it, imagining these, and when you start thinking about it at scale, like, at when it's able to put things out at scale because of the LiDAR. The LiDAR is super important on the phone because it knows what the scale is. And so imagine putting together a Kia where it can show you next to the thing that you're using what to do next. You'll never end up with 3 extra pieces. Well, you might, but it's gonna be a lot harder, and there won't be nearly as much swearing. And so the thing is that it'll say, do you have these pieces? And eventually it's going to be able to match those pieces. Say, oh, grab that one, like it'll like highlight, and you'll go grab that one and put it together. And right now it's, eventually you'll want to be able to look through something and do it. But right now it's being able to see that instruction while you're working is going to really revolutionize what we do. And we do things that are more complicated when we understand them, and they're easier to do. Next question.
Comes from my friend Robin Kurtz in Hanover, Germany. Hi, Robin. Has anyone been able to get the open source USDZ exporter for Blender to export something useful? It's been absolutely useless for me. Have always had to resort to GITF or FBX, which is fine, but you lose any and all animation info.
I think we're still in a very much of a work in progress solution here for USDZ. So I think that the first company that'll probably give us the most tools will probably be Cinema 4D. The first Max on Cinema 4D is probably going to be the one that gives us the most tools first. Jesse?
If you want to get from Blender into USDZ, go the route of GLB. That was the only thing I could get to work.
Well, and again, the issue you have, what's Robin's trying to do there is to be able to get the animation back out, which I don't think that GLB will do. So you can get the geometry out. There's lots of ways to get the geometry out, but how to get the animation out? And that, I think all of this is going to be coming. And again, what we want to do is start getting our head around USDZ, start to understand it before it's easy, before everybody's doing it, and so that we can look for the opportunities within our own markets to leverage. Next question.
Comes from TJ Worrell in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he says, in Alex's Lazy Susan example of scanning an object, how do you sync the second scan of the occluded surface?
You throw all of the objects into a photogrammetry tool if you're using something other than Apple's object capture. But once you have object capture, you'll throw all the images in, and it's going to figure it out for you. So it's going to look at, because what it's doing is it's looking at different elements of whatever is there. So it's going to say, I see, like, for instance, here, let me cut to this here. So when you're actually doing the model, it's going to grab onto things that it sees that are unique in scale and size. So it's going to grab onto little textures, and generally, and what it wants when it's taking the photos is actually these vanishing points. The vanishing points that we see here help it a lot. And so, but it's looking for texture. Now, textures like this are confusing to it because they're all the same. But texture like this and like this, those are very different. And when it can see, when a camera can see this texture and another camera sees this texture, then it does it in different places. So these two cameras see this. These two cameras might see, that. What happens is that as they see more areas that they see changing over time, okay, not over time, but over space, and so they might, as they start to build a relationship of where these cameras are to this because of the vanishing points and because of what they're shared. So it's the shared textures that help the cameras figure out where they are. Then from there, you can reverse triangulate where the cameras actually are, and then you start looking at where they're overlapping, and now you can start building the geometry and the textures. And so that's how the photogrammetry actually, it's a very simplified way of how it works. But it is, so it's all those cameras are using each other. They're using the shared content between them to generate that model, to do it. And so the ones that share content with other things that see the occluded areas are the ones that are. Now, if cameras don't overlap, if they don't see the same thing in both images, like if you take if you have a square, let's say, and I take a picture that's almost all this side and another picture all this side, and another picture straight on and coming down, it won't know what to do with that because it can't figure out what's going on between them. So that's why you tend to want to, if you have a cube, you tend to want to shoot from the corners in, because I see both sides. These two cameras see both sides, and these two, and so they start to share things. And even up at upper corner down, we'll see a bunch of different sides. And it wants to see lots of those shared geometry, shared details is what allows it to triangulate the position of those cameras, and then allows it to backhaul into the surface. And so anyway, so that's but lots and lots of photos generally makes that easier, because it's got lots of things that are overlapping. And so that's the, you'll be able to shoot hundreds. And again, it's more of like, how long will it take you to shoot them, and will you shoot them accurately and in focus? Shooting them out of focus I've done a lot. so that's not as useful. The fact that you have applications able to control the phone, again, the object capture library is going to create an explosion, because there's a bunch of problems that you have with USDZ, which is that, or photogrammetry, which is that if the focal length changes, if the focus changes, if the focal length changes, all those things make photogrammetry really hard. Changing the focal length between the cameras is really, really painful. Changing focus, which subtly changes the focal length, is really painful. So by having applications on the phone and in a library to do this well, means that you have a much more controlled capture environment than we've ever had before for this stuff. So it's going to be just a really exciting time over the next couple weeks, or next couple months, as these apps start to roll out, that are related to this library. And as we go into when we can actually use it. I mean, when it's actually the next operating system in iOS 15, this stuff is, so we're going to see some of it coming out in beta, but October is going to be exciting. Like it's, where we suddenly have a ton of apps, software that supports it, all kinds of things that are there. It's going to be super fun, for us to create this stuff. And so I felt like it might be a little too early to talk about it, but I felt like it'd be fun to know that you knew it when that it was coming. So, I wouldn't say winter is coming, but summer is coming. Anyway, Sky.
Well, again, this is a new language. And what I'm hearing you say is this is going to be the language that we need to understand. And it's going to be very nuanced, and it's going to be a form factor that is going to be used in commerce, which is what we're here to figure out.
Commerce and marketing and education and, all these things, just tourism, like I would much rather, like eventually you're going to get to a point where you can walk up to Gettysburg and pick up your phone and it'll point things out to you.
Yeah.
Like I see where you're at, and here are the things that happened. And, Lee was over here, and this was over here, and this was over, like there's all these things that are, that will be there, that will be interesting. So, So I think
Ready,
that's
ready,
the kind of
Ready
stuff that's
Player
exciting.
One roadmap.
Ready Player One's pretty far away, but it's getting there. But you're right. You're right.
Or somewhere.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks. I hope that was interesting for everybody. It was something that I'm excited about, obviously. So I thought it'd be fun to bring on. And thanks to the producers are doing an incredible job asking questions. We now have to keep on upping our game at answering them, but we got caught into a couple questions that we're really interested in as panelists, and so we ran a little over. So that just means that the questions were even better. So just great work by the producers asking great questions that keep this show going, and great work by the panelists. I think that we're having a good time. I'm gonna, as a quick note, there'll be a little shuffling around. I'm just going to let you know ahead of time that I don't know exactly how to do it. I'm not certain. I thought I had it figured out, but I'm not certain what my bandwidth is going to be like in North Carolina, because I'm in Cape Hatteras, which is not known for its bandwidth. I thought I had something kind of sorted out, and I'm not sure if I do. So we're going to have a couple different people filling in for as hosts, and some of you know who I'm going to be reaching out to, and I've already reached out. So I think that we're going to see, I know Guy's going to do a couple of the days. I'm going to reach out to Bill and Chris. They don't know yet. don't tell them. Anyway, and so between the three of them, I think we're going to spread it out. I may still come in as if the bandwidth is really good, I'll be jumping in. But if it's not, I may come in as a participant or as a panelist but I don't have a lot of confidence in my connection right now. So we'll see how that goes. So just letting you know, next week will be a little bit of a thing. And then the week after that, as a note, just to let you know, Andy will be out here, and we'll be working on, you'll start to see the Zoom ISO and some of the experiments. It'll still be experiments for the rest of the month, but our goal is to kind of have the Zoom ISO, Zoom OSC kind of integration with the ATEMs working by the end of July. So there's a lot happening. So anyway, we'll see you guys in the post show.